if you look at what we're trying to create right now, we're, I would say, at an inflection point in history as important as the end of World War I, where we got the effort at world order tragically wrong. We ended up with millions of dead, the Holocaust in World War II. After World War II, we got more right than wrong with the creation of the International Liberal Order and the United Nations and the Bretton Woods system and the European Coal and Steel Community, NATO, etc. And then the Soviet Union fell. And then the Cold War, we thought it was the end of history. And we thought that everyone could fit into this system that had been created. And it worked for a while, but not everybody came into it. But China grew. China certainly took full advantage of being part of the global system. Russia did not. Russia became more of an outlier. And I think where we are now, and this gets to your question, Becky, of a new world order, is it can go in two directions with the war in Ukraine now being a decisive element. Either the jungle is back, as the historian Bob Kagan talks, and that we can go into a darker era, or we could go into an era, because of the advances of science, advances of technology, that could be one of the most prosperous, promising, progressive, enlightened, moderate, modern eras that we've ever faced. And I think we're in a moment where that's being decided, and I think the importance of the Ukraine issue is that it's a fulcrum for this, and how the world manages this and comes out of this is going to have far-reaching consequences that go beyond Ukraine.
Thank you. Pippa, the US President, and I steal a line from the Washington Post here, their national columnist who is a terrific writer. The US President has framed the tension of this moment as pitting democracy versus autocracy. That is a controversial position, coming as it does from the US President. Do you agree? And how does that framing fit into our wider discussion today?
Well, I think the word framing is correct. I wrote a piece in late October saying we're already in World War III. We are already in conflict that extends so far beyond Ukraine, actually, even within the context of Western Europe. But we've clearly been pretty much at war in space, below the surface of the oceans, submarine warfare between superpowers. I wouldn't even say that this has been happening for at least 4 years, and it's spilled over into public view on the ground. But we don't frame it that way. Also, this idea that it's one kind of political organization system versus another, but really it looks to me like old-fashioned superpower conflicts. Where I'm very optimistic, and I agree with you about how to frame the future, what I see as someone involved in technology, someone involved with entrepreneurs and advising governments, I see a future where we genuinely have ubiquity and not scarcity. I see a future where the internet is available for free for everyone in the most remote locations on the planet, for example. And that means the location of power is going to shift. And I see, as a person in financial markets, decentralization of power structures everywhere, in finance, in political power. And in fact, this conflict that we're in right now may be the beginning of that shift. I certainly see many people from the industrialized world looking very actively to move to places that they used to consider emerging markets, to build businesses there, to expand there. So I also think, to finish, this idea that autocracies have an advantage over democracies, I will fight that tooth and nail. I don't think it is correct, and I think our view that just because, for example, China had a more autocratic approach made them more successful is unproven by time. And we are going to find the places that allow the entrepreneurial spirit to thrive the most and give the greatest political latitude are the ones that are going to grow the best.
Thank you, Pippa. George, your assessment, briefly.
I think human beings live their lives in a storm, and nations live their lives in a storm. and we're gifted with nostalgia. We remember times that never were and long for them. So we are now in a normal condition of humans. We love those we love, we hate those we hate, we fight, we make up. And human beings are this thing. But it is the most interesting thing that we remember things that we never ever were. We remember a time where this tension of love and hate didn't exist. We remember a time that if we could only get back to, all would be well. And sometimes we imagine that if I have the internet, that will take me home. But there is no going home, we are at home. And we have to be at peace with where we are. And there is no time that has ever been at peace with the chaos that it was surrounded by. And that's the tragedy of the human condition and its greatness.
Right, thank you. Your positions are quite clear. Dr. Anwar Gargash, then, let's just start with you. If we are looking at a new world order that is, as Pippa describes it, decentralized, if we are looking at a new world that is not a single power based, as it were, and a world that is layered by these, what feel like very new global issues of climate change, of cybersecurity, as you suggest, of technology and the speed of that, what does that mean for this region? Because the perspective that we discuss world order through, as Fred has rightly pointed out, has been a Western perspective. My sense is that we must stop doing that. So what is the impact on this region?
I think to start with, Becky, the region has to catch up. I mean, the region is really behind various other regions in the world. And I think it's by prioritizing its own politics and prioritizing its own polarizing wars and confrontations. The region really, I think, number one, as the world is becoming multipolar, and I believe it is, and I agree also with the idea that this multipolarity is moving from economic to, from political to economic to what I would call even currency multipolarity as we move forward. I think the region is really going through two phases. Number one is witnessing the sort of upper structure changing, but it has to catch up. And it has to catch up by emphasizing, in my opinion, non-political issues. Some of them are global issues, the ones you mentioned, and certainly COVID is a clear test of what we should be concentrating on: food security and cyber capability and climate change and others. But more fundamentally, I think the region lags behind in terms of multi projects of integration, economic integration, etc. I mean, if you just look at the GCC, for example, the GCC has never really been a big success when it comes to political direction. It has had varied views there, but it's been a huge success really in creating what I would call a common market. So I think the region needs to catch up before it actually becomes a major player. Otherwise, it will be very much subservient to this multipolarity that we're talking about.
And I want to come back to you for a sense from you, which I think would be extremely useful for this audience, as to what is going on behind the scenes here. When I say behind the scenes, it's very visible that there is enormous change in this region. Witness the meeting in the Negev Desert, the summit attended by the foreign minister here, His Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, 4 Arab foreign ministers meeting in the Negev Desert with the Israelis. I mean, if you told me that that was going to happen 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even a couple of weeks ago, I think I'd have still been surprised by that. So I do want to get, because I think that's very important, we get your perspective as to what is going on behind the scenes. But thank you, Fred. This sense that you, and you certainly see this here, that we are in a pivot with foreign policy to a policy that fundamentally and clearly serves economic needs, geopolitics to geoeconomics, as Dr. Anwar has suggested, I think is certainly an extremely important driver of what is going on today. But your sense, I want to get a sense of if where we're at and the impact that this will have on global policy going forward and how this world is run.
The impact of the economics of it all. Well, first of all, let's take a look at what makes up world orders. World orders are that a group of countries across the world agree to a set of rules, and they agree to play by them. The second is there's a balance of power so that no power feels that it can subjugate a neighbor. But then the third part of this is a consensus that everyone accepts this. It's almost too utopian to come about. And so what's emerging right now, which I think is a danger, is a Chinese-centered order and a US-centered order, and that we're breaking down again. And that's not a healthy outcome. It's not the outcome we want. But that gets to the economics, and that's what I wanted to touch on, because the economics are that China, I think in 2016-17, invested $53 billion in the United States. Last year, $1 billion. So there's already a decoupling. There's already a breaking down. And the question is, how does this play out right now? And so I think you're going to see, in an economic sense, you're going to see these two worlds, but it's not going to be that neat. I think you're going to see the evolution of regional organizations, and regional, because it's so hard to create a world order, I think you're going to see regional orders spring up. And then you have links between regional orders, but they will be very much guided by economic interests, social interests, and also security interests. You see things like the Quad, like the Abraham Accords, so ad hoc, not inflexible alliances, and that seems to me what's emerging at the moment.
Should countries' governments be forced to make a choice, to take a side at this point, Pippa? I mean, certainly, again, this is a big narrative here. This is this struggle by two great powers. I use the term great loosely to a certain extent, but two great powers, and others being forced to take a choice. I think this speaks to this kind of emergence of these regional powers and the emergence of the middle powers here, because we're hearing, quite frankly, don't force us into a corner here. Are they right?
Well, it may be a bit late for that. I remember talking to an Australian diplomat at one point about this break between the US and China, and said, both sides are going to say, whose team are you on? And he said, our job is to make sure the question never arises. But the question has arisen. And so I think we have to go deeper. And it's not about the US versus China. It's about what underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was very privileged. My father was an advisor to Nixon when they came off the gold standard in '71. And so I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one. And the new one, the new accounting, is what we call blockchain. It means digital. It means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on. It also raises huge dangers in terms of the balance of power between states and citizens. In my opinion, we're going to need a digital constitution of human rights if we're going to have digital money. But also, this new money will be sovereign in nature. Most people think that digital money is crypto and private. But what I see are superpowers introducing digital currency. The Chinese were the first. The US is on the brink, I think, of moving in the same direction. The Europeans have committed to that as well. And the question is, will that new system of digital money and digital accounting accommodate the competing needs of the citizens of all these locations so that every human being has a chance to have a better life? Because that's the only measure of whether a world order really serves.
George, what do you believe the biggest shift will be?
Well, there's always a major shift in great powers. The world in 1945 was defined in a certain way. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Maastricht was written. The Japanese economic miracle turned out to be not such a miracle, and so on. So in 1991, we had a change. We are now having another change. The first, we are discovering that Russia is not a great power. Economically, it lags behind South Korea. Militarily, it has shown itself not to be significant. It is a nuclear power. We've also seen that in China, although it has had a magnificent run for 40 years, has now entered a period of economic dysfunction. Its economy, its financial system and such has to be restructured. These restructurings aren't easy, and they are never come without political problems. So it's a great power, but how it plays out the game is another question. But one thing we've discovered, I think, in this crisis, the enormous power of the United States, which has been forgotten. But the way the Americans were able to use the dollar as a weapon to put the Russians on defensive, the manner in which the United States was able to rally NATO to this common cause, I mean, when we look at the way we thought of the world a while ago, it's different now.
No, and that and you're making a very good point. I guess that begs the question: how long does that last?
Oh, not very long. No, I mean, look,
also begs the question. So go on.
When 1945 went to 1999, 1999 went to this point, if this is a transitory point. And every 20, 30, 40 years, we have a transition in the world. And that should not be unexpected. We're a dynamic people, and we will change the way we live, and the system will change, and we will have to align ourselves with it.
You made a point about, the US, and I'm not sure if you actually used the term, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but has weaponized the dollar to a certain extent, or has used the dollar. You've seen the power of the dollar at a time when, as Pippa rightly points out, should we be looking at the sort of the fiat that we have used over the past X amount of years as anything like useful going forward, or is that redundant? And if it is, as yet, still not redundant, is it the dollar or is it the Chinese currency? And we have seen the efforts or the noises made by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia recently just to suggest that it doesn't have to be the US currency.